Hello.
Nope. She's 6 weeks. Oh, yeah, good. Yeah. A little bit. Usually goes for a couple 4-hour stretches.
We had a baby. He really was not that long. So he was doing the midnight evening, and then I was
Oh, we did that last time, that was fun.
Yeah.
My husband's got it now. Great, she's looking.
Three different articles, not.
When are we gonna have a?
Well, we're close enough to 7, so good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the Tuesday, February 23rd, 2016 Planning Commission meeting to order. If everyone will please rise and state the Pledge of Allegiance with me. We'll move into roll call, starting on my right.
Freeman here.
Barber here.
Limer here?
Mater here. Lavella here.
Austin here.
Quorum is present. Moving on to the consent agenda. All matters listed within the consent agenda have been distributed to each member of the Planning Commission for study. These items are considered to be routine and will be enacted upon by one motion with no separate discussion. If separate discussion is desired on an item from either the Planning Commission or from the floor, that item may be removed from the consent agenda and placed on the regular agenda. Is there any member of the commission that would like to have a item removed from the consent agenda? Is there any items any member of the public would like to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Second.
I have a motion made by Lavella with a second by Barber that we approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries with all in favor. Moving down to the other business item for this evening. Item number 1, received the draft land development code document and discuss Article 1 general provisions and Article 3 applications and procedures of the draft land code development meeting. No action will be taken as this is discussion only. We have a presentation this evening.
Yes, we do.
Wonderful.
Got a little help with this from our consultant, so we'll have to thank him for that. But first, I wanted to know how many of you got through the entire land development code? Because, you know, if there was somebody I was thinking I might need to take you out to dinner or something, like a superstar. Yeah, we don't intend for you to have obviously read the whole thing. Hopefully you flipped through the whole thing, got familiar with how it's set up and everything, and then focused on 1 and 3. And so what I'm planning to do is First to present the presentation that sort of introduces the whole code and the big approaches, and then see if you have any questions or comments for, you know, the consultant's perspective on like kind of the whole thing, or his memo, you know, the presentation or the memo, and kind of hold your other questions or comments about 1 and 3 till after that, because I have another presentation, a shorter one, that's just kind of introducing what's the general changes and things in Articles 1 and 3, kind of a more detailed look. Okay. First, just to kind of recap the project objectives, definitely wanted to streamline the process, and you can probably tell from the thickness of your book that he's done a pretty good job with that. Creating a user-friendly code. There's a lot of references and a lot of things that relate to the comprehensive plan in here, also related to the economic development strategy, and promoting council's strategic goals as well. So sort of that's your big picture criteria for what we're supposed to be accomplishing with this code. These are just a recap of the themes of the economic development plan or strategy. And 2 of those items, particularly quality community and downtown, emphasize placemaking, or good community design at a human scale that builds value or economic opportunity in your community. These are the 7 main themes of the comprehensive plan. Again, there's a lot of public realm design elements for shaping distinct places and enabling development types through the community. This is kind of a status update of where we are, and you can see right now we're just at the initial draft. It's definitely a working draft. Technical committee has really only made it through Articles 1, 3, and 4 at this point with the consultant, so we'll hopefully be meeting with him soon to talk about 5. The advisory committee received the same kind of introduction that you're getting tonight and had a few comments. Eventually, what we're hoping to do is have this kind of input, you know, a couple articles at a time. As your first look at it, you can provide comments back, just as the technical committee is, for the consultant to consider, and then it'll end up coming back as a final draft, which you can still tweak, and then make a recommendation on that draft to the council. So this is what's happening. On your right-hand side, you'll see that he has taken the subdivision and the zoning ordinances and combined them with the design standards for this one land development code. Excuse me. So in creating a more user-friendly document, this is kind of the things he was thinking about. Needing some more intent statements and decision criteria to really back up the standards in the plan. Reorganizing the use table so that it's more based on like general categories, and then intensity levels underneath that. Special topic ordinances have been reorganized into their own article. He's working on graphics. There's some tables, new tables in the code, which are very helpful. Simplified language, which is very welcome. Sometimes it's hard to figure out attorney language, right? So headings, subheadings, things to just keep us more organized. And all of this streamlining is meant to basically raise expectations of what, when, and how we're doing this process. So some of it relates to simplified common procedures. So instead of repeating processes many, many times, he took all those things together in like a general section and then broke down into specific procedures after that. Guided flexibility, it's the first substantive change basically to the plan, is using, or to the ordinance, is using that planned zoning for true master plan development. So it's not meant to be a way to avoid ordinance standards, but it's meant to accommodate things that are truly innovative or unique projects that are supported by the comp plan. So, you know, those would be projects that can't be achieved by any single district, the way it's written, or they have broader benefits to the community or other development. But the plan district, as he has envisioned it, is not just for internal project benefits. So this requires planning at a larger scale, not on a site plan level. So this is an introduction to the major changes and the new approaches that are in the code. They're tied to the comprehensive plan. We'll discuss those in each of the following slides. First, this is a graphic representation, the kind of graphs that will be in there later, of these different elements. It illustrates planning and design concepts from the big scale down to the small scale. And so we're doing that so that we start with the design of the public realm and the relationship to development first, and then create distinct places with regulations that recognize those distinctions. These are examples of street types. That's the first element in context for distinct places. It's the most significant component of the public realm as far as area and impact. So these different street types are like a street design overlay over a conventional street type. So in the chart, you'll see where it says street type at the top, arterial, collector, local. Those are functional classes of roads based on how many people they move, you know, how they function. And the street types on the left-hand side, standard, activity, neighborhood, and green, you can see that, like for example, you could have an arterial street that would have all these different characters on it, depending on where it was and how it relates to development. It's only going to, these street standards will only apply to new streets that are built through the development review. But you can, it can also guide capital projects if the city's doing some street improvements, and it helps build that relationship between street types and the development standards. These are examples of those different kinds of streets. These may all be arterial streets, like I said, but they have dramatically different character, and they support dramatically different development patterns and designs. These are the open space types that are in the plan. It's similar to the street types. They're based on context. So in this case, we may think that the amount of open space, or like requiring 10%, for example, is not the critical component. Rather, we're going to be concerned about how that open space is designed and where it's located. So these standards recognize these different values in different contexts. This way, open spaces become an extension of the public realm that is shaped by the streets. So it's considered, you know, at the largest scale, again, but then also at the lowest scale or site design. And these can be common, private, public, open spaces. There's some examples of the different types that are addressed in the code. Now we get into the building type standards. These are development standards that are from, this table has development standards from all districts compiled into one table. So that took several pages of regulations out and plunked them in one table. And then some of them are further refined or adjusted to work well with typical building types, particularly small-scale, multi-unit buildings that work well in downtowns or in mixed-density neighborhoods. So when he started putting these building types together, he realized this approach could work for all the districts. So that's what we're trying to do at this point. So all existing standards, development standards, are still here. Some of them are slightly refined or targeted to specific areas, and this will allow some new opportunity for development. These are examples of the different development types. And you won't recognize some of them as being something that's already in Gardner, but they may inspire something like this to occur in Gardner. This slide shows your residential building types. And the ones that are highlighted in green are the ones that are pretty much maintained from the current code. Not much changes there at all. So that's your detached house, your duplexes, your garden apartments, mid-rise apartments. These 4 in the red account for things that are not currently necessarily addressed in context in our code, which would be your compact development, either detached or duplexes, row houses, and walk-up apartments. And in the same way, we also have a zoning district that's not currently well utilized, which is the R4 zoning district. So this has kind of been repurposed to kind of accommodate that mixed use area. And these are the zoning districts that are currently existing that are not really impacted by significant changes. So just one residential zoning district is impacted. These are the non-residential development standards. There's a better focus on the form and the scale of development so that we can allow the standards to be applied to different contexts and places, and to address important physical details to allow more flexibility in the types of uses that can occur. That's why we can have a more general use approach, because this is more about the form. Here is examples of those forms. Each is distinct in its own character and has its own development standards. These are the building types in the non-residential that are pretty much maintained from the current code. Just general, small commercial, general commercial, large commercial, and industrial. These are the new opportunities. Most of them address small scale coordination, better coordination with the public realm for like small commercial storefronts, mixed use, live-work buildings. And similarly to the residential areas, we have new building types are more seriously impacting in the CO, COA, and C1 districts, but in the C1 district, it's more impacting what we're prohibiting. Like in the other districts, we're enabling more things to happen. In the C1 or downtown district, we're kind of prohibiting certain types of commercial that maybe aren't quite in character. Oops. These are the other non-residential districts that are not significantly impacted. So as far as relationship with the public realm, we have frontage types. This is a new approach. It relates private development with the public realm. So now, setback is not the most important thing. The relationship of the private to the public space is the more important thing. So there's different design strategies that are matched with different combinations of buildings and street types. But you would only require a certain type of building if the appropriate street type existed to kind of support that. That's the idea. So here are some examples of the frontage types: buffer edge, yard and setback, terrace, courtyard, frontage plaza, and enhanced streetscape frontage. And those are, defined in the code. The first two are kind of a more conventional approach, which is more oriented to a setback strategy. All of the 4 other ones have a more context-specific approach. You see the one in the bottom right is that enhanced streetscape, so it's more of a merged strategy that goes along with the street design or the public space design. So next steps, we hope that we will be able to work through that working draft with you in February or March, working towards developing that final draft in March and April, and probably review and discussion of that final draft all through April and May. Maybe we'll be able to introduce a final draft for formal review in May. You know, things go well. So, Chris's question is, are we on the right track? And he would like us to share your thoughts with him.
Commissioners, feel free to provide feedback.
You know, when we got our book, I didn't talk about it from my wife because she'd make fun of me, but it's pretty exciting to see it come together because the land development code is unbelievably mind-numbingly complicated unless you live and breathe that stuff, which most of us don't. And these tables, no offense to those that might around the room, but not all of us are wired quite that way. These tables, it's almost silly to say how much it helps to see the tables drafted out the way that they have to, and how they can put these things within a page that may have been 12 pages of the code originally. It's going to be a tremendous help when we start talking about our economic incentive packages and putting these in front of the developers and saying, this will help you navigate, and then here are all the individuals that can. So it's exciting to finally see it coming out. I know it's been an incredibly long process that we've been able to maybe shield ourselves from a little bit, but we're seeing it come here and being thankful for that work. I'm glad to see where it's come so far. I'm excited about that. As far as updates and things, everything seems to me to be on the right track and very well reviewed and very well understood before making the revisions to it.
Great. Jerry, anything?
Everything looks great. It's much more simplified, which is good. Otherwise, it looks great to me.
Okay. Brett?
I'm going to echo what he said. I've really appreciated the condensing of the pages of regulations into tables. That does help quite a bit. I think it can convey a lot of the same information without having to be so mind-numbing on some of the details. I also appreciated the additional zoning and building types that we'll be able to look at to encourage development. That's the exciting part that I can also echo Heath. And the additional district development standards, I think I'm referring to them the right way, to restrict the type of development in certain areas. I think that's probably also necessary to kind of direct not only what we want to keep, but which direction we want to head. So I was happy to see that stuff.
Good. Karen?
I agree with all that. And I like to think that we're on the cusp of having another growth spurt, which was kind of painful the last time we went through growing pains. And this is just so much easier to understand. It's going to be so much more attractive to everyone. So, agreed. It's nice to see it come together. It is exciting.
Brad?
No, I don't know that I have a lot more to add other than it is kind of a different approach to some of the aspects that are not bad. They can be good changes. They're just different. So wrapping our heads around that and understanding that, at least for me, will be a challenge that I'm willing to head down. So it'll be good.
Great. I'm just going to have to echo you all. I completely agree. This is fresh. It's easy. It's condensed. It makes sense. So very happy to see it. Exactly. Anybody can understand it.
Very good. Before I give you the other presentation, we talked more specifically about Articles 1 and 3. I forgot to ask you earlier, or to get an idea of how you want to approach the feedback on Articles 1 and 3, whether you want to do it just like you did, person by person, go through everything you had, or do you want to do it page by page? So maybe think about that.
I'll throw out a suggestion. How about let's take each article at a time, start with Article 1, give the quick presentation, and then we'll go right down the row and ask for feedback, and then move on to Article 3.
Okay, sure. Yeah, the presentation is divided per article, so I think that will work just fine. Okay, so I've kind of organized the analysis, just a brief synopsis of these articles relating to what's new, what are the significant changes, if any, and what are the things that might need further consideration in those articles. But to start with just a general question that I had, which was, should we maintain a consistent numbering system as the rest of the Gardner Municipal Code? And I certainly think our attorney might have some insight there, but this is a different numbering system than the other code. In reviewing Article 1, starting with new provisions, in case you wanted to flip to your code, I did put the references there. But there are 4 new rules of construction, and one really exciting thing, or something I really like, is that there's a measurement section. So if instead of having those kind of definitions hidden, or these measurement standards hidden in the definitions, we have a section that tells people, how do you measure all these different things in the code? So it's all together. Within those measurement standards so far, we have a new concept, which is a build-to range. So that would say your front of your building needs to be within this, it needs to be within that range. So it's not a minimum setback, it's kind of a minimum and a maximum. We also have pretty clear standards about computation of time. And this is the place where some of those new intent statements, or there's just a kind of a statement in there explaining the intent statements, the graphics, and the commentary. That's a new section. There's also 2 new rules for interpretation of the zoning map. There is a new section on interpretation of plans, and a new section that introduces the concept of being able to use other resources, guides, and industry standards in applying this code. There's in the administration section of 102 A through D, that introduces the players in this development process, including staff, planning commission, and the governing body. Before, I really had just talked about the Board of Zoning Appeals. And it has a new statement on enforcement in 105B. So that's kind of a detailed look, maybe more detailed than we really need to go into, but these here are just kind of the significant changes that were in section, or Article 1. We have a much improved section on nonconformances. The current ordinance is very, very confusing on nonconformities. So it's divided into nonconforming uses, nonconforming structures, nonconforming site conditions, nonconforming lots, and nonconforming signs. And they each have their own way of handling them. One thing to note on nonconforming signs, currently signs can only be altered in conformance with standards. So really they're not supposed to be altered at all. They'd lose their nonconforming status if they were altered, which sometimes can encourage disinvestment in signs. The Land Development Code allows some alterations to be done without losing that nonconforming status. You can't make it bigger or redesign it, but you can change the type, the text on the face, you can do repairs, things like that. Some additional considerations we might want to take up with the consultant. We used to have a rule of construction that dealt with shall versus may and what that means in the code, shall being more regulatory and may being sort of a guide. I'm not sure if he took that out for a particular reason, but that's just something I want to ask him about. And we've already talked that there may be, as we're going through the rest of the code, we may come up with additional things that need to be explained as far as how you measure them. So kind of be on the lookout for those kind of things. Like, where do you measure the caliper of a tree? A certain height above the root ball, or where and how? We kind of were playing around with the lot frontage one, and does that mean, and what if there's streets on 3 sides? You count all 3 of those, for example. How do you measure facade area? It should be kind of self-explanatory, but maybe it's not, to everybody. One thing that I wondered about is building height is measured to the deck of a flat roof, and so in my mind that doesn't include a parapet that sticks above the roof, which could be kind of high. So I have a question about that. And I think we noted previously, Michelle, when we were talking with them, that we wanted to keep that burden of proof for the nonconformity on the property owner, so we wouldn't have to do all the research on that. So that was, most of the things that I had to present on Article 1. It's pretty, simple article, so. But maybe I'll have some comments or questions.
Definitely, we'll just start like we did before. Heath, is there anything you want to add or comment on?
One very, very minor detail, and Ryan may have to chime in, it's, 1.04 Article C, when it references the governing body.
Mhm.
And only because it's Gardner, this comes up, it references an elected governing body, and while there's appointees, if there's any concern for that maybe not being accurate, if it's not all elected representatives on the council. Or if it matters at all, it may not matter in the least, it's just one of those things,
Yeah.
as I was reading through it, that stuck out. Personal experience.
Well, right, our code defines the governing body as, all council members and the mayor.
Exactly.
And so, like, when we have voted on zoning matters, because the state statutes dictates that the governing body votes on it, the mayor actually has been voting on that.
Sure. Well, I wonder then if the terminology here should just explain the way that the code does, that the governing body is the council and mayor, rather than it saying, my only concern is the elected body if there's appointed officials on the council.
Right.
Because at times we've had.
Yeah, I mean,
majority.
that would be certainly more clear.
Okay.
The only problem would be is, we could address and amend this section at that time, if we redo that charter ordinance and redefine if it's just council subsequently that are members of the governing body, we could come back and change this, but.
Have to change a lot today. We did that.
That's true.
That'd be the checklist.
Right.
But that was really, as silly as it sounds, one of those things that just popped out to me. Only because I was aware.
Good feedback. Sherry?
I don't have a lot to say. I like that the conformance part has been put in. I mean, I think this makes it simple for anybody that wants to read this, or that was looking to know whether they're in conformance could be able to read this and would understand, yes, I am or no, I'm not. So I appreciated that that makes it simpler for people, lay people.
Agreed.
Like me.
Right. Brett?
I also appreciate the 1.06, nonconformance section. I think it, spells it out, removes any kind of gray area or any ambiguities. And on the, enforcement section before that, I know there was, statements for violations and penalties. I was glad to see the enforcement added in there, just to, again, kind of added some, details so people wouldn't be as confused or need more information. So I appreciate seeing that.
Great. Karen?
I think it looks great. I appreciate what he said. I like that you're giving some consideration to shall and may. It's escaping me now. It's been a long time ago, but bad things can happen over people's interpretation of shall and may, and it doesn't seem like, it seems like a tiny little thing, but it can really.
Brett?
Apparently I'm the problem child. I actually have several questions, and if I get too down in the weeds or nitpicky, just let me know.
No, planners love nitpicky people.
On 1.0, and I'm avoiding the grammatical stuff, because he said he'll pick all that up.
Yeah.
So kind of in general terms, questions that I had, 1.02B4 on the measurement of signs, we talk about using two standard geometrical shapes around irregular shaped signs. Is there a reason to do that rather than just calculating the actual area of a sign?
Well, sometimes signs will have like a little triangular, a little piece that sticks up further than the rest. Like, it'll be script writing and then one letter will stick up, further. And so rather than draw the rectangle big enough to, include that and have a bunch of blank space counted, you can, say that's a rectangle and then this is a little triangle that encompasses that. So it's it's letting them have some creativity, I guess, in how they're sign is, displayed without getting penalized for size, I think is the idea.
On the double-faced signs, I wasn't entirely clear on what those were, I don't think.
Okay, so some signs are, like the pole signs that would be stuck out in the yard or something, they would have writing on both sides of them.
Right, and then, which is what I thought it was, but then it says double-faced sign are no more than 3 feet apart at any location, where the sign faces of a double-faced sign are no more than 3 feet apart.
Well, sometimes a double-faced sign will be more like this, instead of, or, you know, it'll be like this. It'll all be on one structure, but it'll be kind of separated, or it'll be like this, or it might have 3 of them, you know, kind of hooked in the middle. And, so he's just saying, if they're that close together, you only count one of the faces. Or if they're unequal, you count the bigger one.
Clearance on the signs, sign clearance measured from the highest point of the ground directly below the sign to the lowest point of the sign structure. Would we not want to make that the average grade around the sign so that you can't basically dig a hole to increase the clearance?
Yeah, I had the same question about that. What if the sign's down in a hole, like say here's your roadway and then you have this big ditch and the sign's actually down in the ditch, you know? Or what if somebody builds a berm and puts a sign on it,
Right.
you know? So, yeah, we might want to look at that a little bit more detail.
Questions on the computation of time. Do weekends count towards the total, but not the last day? Or do they not count towards the total?
The last day of the time period shall be included unless it's Saturday or Sunday or a holiday. In that case, it goes ahead to the next working day to end it, but that's only if it's the last day of the time period. So it is normally including weekends. It's only if it's the last day. It doesn't include Sunday.
Right, and so then I guess my question is, why the difference?
That's pretty standard. I mean, typically, if we're gonna be requiring time periods, it's gonna be time, within which, a landowner is going to have to do something or file something with the city. And if it's on a Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday, obviously the city's probably closed for business. And so then it just, rolls to the next, day that the city would be open, so that, obviously, they can take the appropriate action when the city's open for business.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I guess I just, a little confusion on why we use calendar days except for if it's the last day instead of just going with business days. But that's not a huge issue.
Business days will just be a harder calculation for people to track, because you'd have to do 5s, and if there's a holiday in there, you'd have to take that one out.
And then
If you just go calendar days, you submit it on the 27th, it's due on the next 27th type thing, unless it falls on a weekend.
And a lot of people, I mean, what's a business day, legal holidays,
Right.
The city may be open on some legal holidays, but other people are closed. I mean, it gets very confusing. So calendar days seems to be, easier to understand.
Okay. Down on 1.04, Section D defines a lot of the requirements for the Board of Zoning Appeals, but it doesn't go into nearly the same level of detail on the Planning Commission or governing body.
Mm-hmm.
What's the reasoning behind that?
Well, that is a good question. I wondered if, a lot of it's covered in the bylaws, we might not want to put it in here, because then if you ever change your bylaws, then we have to change this. I think the Board of Zoning Appeals section was already in our code, and he sort of just transferred it over, and the rest of it is new. That may not be a very good reason, but I think that might be the reason. but we can definitely ask him, why that is.
I think I can add,
Okay.
the microphone doesn't work.
Oh, jump in whenever you feel.
I think I can probably add a couple details to that. What Kelly has said is also, I would agree with. Another thing you have to think about is the BZA is really the keeper of the zoning ordinance. The planning commission is the keeper of the comprehensive plan. So the previous code had really outlined a lot of the details about, the BZA in it. And like Kelly said, that's a lot of the transfer over. Also, you know, what he has in here is mostly state statute, things, and we could put the state statute stuff in there regarding, what it outlines for the planning commission too. But, most of that stuff is taken care of in your bylaws, and it's actually easier to update your bylaws than it is to update the code. So, it's one of those things of, we could probably pull some of that stuff out for the BZA if we wanted to, or things like that. Or just pulled it over from the previous code.
Okay.
And then, another thing, the city code actually has a section that outlines the same kind of information that you see on the BZA, in chapter 2. So it's the same kind of, the qualifications, the terms, the meanings, the, other things. So, while it may not be in the zoning ordinance, it's somewhere else in the city code, and then in your bylaws too.
The very last page, section F, on signs. 1D, says reestablishment after any removal of the sign that is not part of ordinary maintenance. How long can a sign be out for maintenance? Do we need to define that? Or can it be gone for years and then?
Yeah,
come back?
that's a good point. Yeah, but sometimes the codes do say a certain time period.
And, I guess,
There's a, does B have, state that, continues after more than 6 months of abandonment? Is that
Correct.
Amy?
Yeah, that's what I was going to point out, is that we generally tend to
Okay.
use if something's not there for 6 months, if they haven't pulled a building permit or if they haven't given us any indication that there's a reason for it to be gone for that long, it basically would fall underneath the abandonment or the vacancy type scenario, in our opinion.
yep, that makes sense. I'd overlook that. Thank you.
Or if you wanted them to have a shorter time for maintenance, you could, but at least it's limited to 6 months.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I guess my other question, F1B, how is that different than maintenance? I mean, physically changed, expanded, or extended. I could see someone arguing that maintaining and refurbishing a sign is physically changing it, so I don't know if we need to,
Maybe we need a definition
Clarify
of
that
physically
somehow.
changed, I don't know.
or maybe I'm just overthinking it.
No, we have to overthink it. Yeah, I don't know, usually they define as if repainting is not physically changing, but these things are physically changing, so we might need a definition there.
A lot of times what I see on signs is that if you're changing, in particularly on non-conforming signs, if you're, changing the messaging, or the lettering, but you're not really changing the structure or the size, then you're permitted to do that. It's really, and this is usually for all non-conforming uses, it's any substantial expansion of it, or, you know, like I've dealt with billboards where, you know, I dealt with a billboard one time on behalf of the municipality that got taken out by a tornado, and kind of went round and round as to whether that's maintenance, reconstruction, or basically, you know, kind of an expansion, because they wanted to come back in with new signage. And this was one of the small billboards, and only put up a bigger billboard. So, yes, usually, I mean, if you're talking about the same amount of sign space, and you're just changing message, I think on non-conforming signs, that's typically.
Yeah, and some of them have removable faces. You can just slide the, you know, removable face out and put a new one in, and really, that's not a significant change. But if you are taking that whole structure down and replacing it with a different kind of structure or something, that seems like.
Or adding on to it or taking
Yeah,
off.
because then you got a new investment you're already making, so we don't want to preserve that other right, I guess, that they had.
Good. That's all I have.
Okay, good, no, good questions, that's perfect.
Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
And we know you read every detail, right?
And I don't have anything else to add, so we can go on to Article 3.
Okay. There were some corrections or questions that we noted in the table 3-1, like not having CC for, you know, city council, putting governing body, GB for governing body up in the top. Then under subdivision administrative plat, I just had noted that in the current ordinance, we do allow for appeals of things like replats to the planning commission, so I want to ask him about, you know, putting that appeal letter in there for you all for that. And I had questions about whether the city basically can apply for a preliminary development plan. And Michelle and I talked about that for a while. I mean, I don't think it hurts anything to have it there, that the city can do that. I don't know if that would ever happen, but. As far as the conditional use permit, the R means recommendation, the PH means public hearing, the D means decision. And so the red letters are something that's changed, or that we think needs to be changed based on what we currently do. That's not correct in the table as you see it, in the copy that you were given. Was that clear as mud, or does that make sense? So in that case, a conditional use permit would be recommendation by staff, or review by staff, recommendation by the planning commission, after you hold a public hearing, and then the governing body would have a final approval.
So that is how it is today, correct?
Right.
And the consultant felt that instead of being a recommendation, that the planning commission should be the decision maker, with the city council being the appeal of decision.
I think it might have just been a mistake.
Or
That was a mistake.
Okay.
That is outlined in state statute, so, yeah, that was just a mistake.
Okay, cool, thanks. Yep, that makes sense.
Okay, these are the newish provisions, and that just means, you know, that either they're significantly changed or they're new altogether. So in 301 is where he moved all the common procedures together. We did find some other ones that are still lagging in the other sections that we may need to move to that section, but that was his intent. 302 has new review criteria for preliminary plats, and all of that review criteria is meant to go back to our comprehensive plan and really help implement that plan. And if there's any just, you know, kind of question about whether something should be approved, then that criteria is what you would go back to. In section 304, submittals for the preliminary development plan, you can see that he's outlined some kind of specific outlines of things that would be submitted. It would include the public realm plan, since we now have so much focus on the public realm. development plan, existing conditions, those things are, stuff we normally take anyway. Phasing or implementation, and the illustrative plan. The phasing and implementation, if I remember right from our conversation, was important because if there was going to be any, like if it was going to take longer, to do this development, or it was anticipated that it would in the beginning, that would need to be approved up front because he's not allowing as much for extensions and extensions. He wants people to kind of plan ahead for these planned developments and really have a good idea of what's going to take place. And if you perceive something differently in our conversation, just jump into it. 306 has new review criteria for site plans. 309, that effective filing and the action and review criteria for appeals of administrative decisions are new provisions. You just want to put a star by them or something. Then there's things that have been significantly changed. 301D, it definitely clarifies the staff review process, kind of puts a schedule out there, so that people have a little more certainty about when their applications are going to be seen and dealt with. 301E, the publishing date now matches state statute, and just based on when the local paper is published, it's going to allow us to not have to have so much time ahead of time to publish things, just the way the days fall. So it actually follows state statutes and turns out to be much better for us. 301I deals with successive applications. I think right now it says if you have the same type of application, you can't submit it for another year. But the change provision says if after 6 months, things have changed on other sites, land uses have changed, there's other things that are going on, you might be able to reapply as soon as 6 months, or no sooner than 6 months. So it's a little bit more flexible if somebody wasn't successful with the first application and still feels strongly about coming forward with something that's not significantly changed, but other things have changed. 302C clarifies administrative plats as a kind of a separate entity, makes it, like these minor subdivisions and lot splits, lot combinations, boundary changes, things like that can be approved by staff. It just makes that more clear, and with all the provisions that relate to that. 302E, preliminary plat, effective 18 months with option for 1-year extension. This was something that when the technical committee was talking with the consultant, was a recommendation to him to allow a little bit more time before that preliminary plat would expire before they submit their final plat. And 302F is a clarification of the process for final plats. Some additional considerations that we noted, staff recommends that a lot of times ordinances will have a chart or something with things you need to include in your applications. They get pretty specific. And there may be, this site plan application, you have to submit these things. And if it's a preliminary development plan, you have to submit these things. And that's a great thing to have, but we think that maybe we'll just have that separate checklist that would be a part of the application and not have it in the ordinance, so if we made changes or something came up that we wanted to know something else, we wouldn't have to change the ordinance, we only have to change our application in the checklist. But we will have those things, so people will know at the pre-application meeting what kind of things they're going to need to submit. I think we need a section on public hearings in 301 where it's talking about common procedures and things, because it was in our current ordinance, but somehow it's kind of scattered at different places in the new one, and I think it just didn't make it to that section. So I'm thinking it might go around 301F. We might have a section on public hearings, which would move the other ones down in the numbering system, but we seem to have eliminated a lot of the lot split provisions, and I haven't really talked to Michelle about that either. Maybe those are in state statute, we don't need to address them here. I just wondering if we need those items to be clarified in this code. Are we still allowing the preliminary development plan to substitute for a preliminary plat? That was kind of removed as far as I could tell. Are we still allowing people to concurrently apply for rezoning and preliminary development plan applications? I'm not too sure about that. Site plan applicability. I think this is important for people to know what triggers a site plan. If you're building a house, does that trigger a site plan, for instance? If you're, just expanding a parking lot, does that trigger a site plan? So I think we need some kind of a thing that explains to people when they need site plans. Or maybe we just need site plans for everything, I don't know. Also, I think we need to clarify the entire process relating to approving substantial differences to preliminary development plans. First, the director can determine whether something's of a substantial difference from a preliminary development plan to a final. But then, if people don't agree with that, in our current zoning ordinance, it says they can appeal that to, I think, the planning commission. That's not really addressed in this. We kind of lost some stuff along the way, for example. And then, the expiration date for site plans. I had some notes relating to that, and I gotta go to my notes page. I forgot what that is. Okay, currently site plans are good for 2 years, and the planning commission can grant time extensions. The proposed code expires if they don't apply for a building permit for one or more buildings within 1 year of approval, and then any other approved elements if a permit for them is not submitted within 2 years. I'm not sure what we think about that, or if we just gave it 2 years on everything. So that was just some thoughts. And that was pretty much all I had to point out to you on 3. And we'd like to have your comment.
Yeah, I agree. Keith, we'll start with you again.
I really didn't have much thought.
Okay, Sherry?
I would agree with all of your thoughts about what maybe needs to be added or changed. Otherwise, I didn't have anything else.
Okay. Fred?
One thing I did note, I did like seeing the new review criteria spelled out for the site plans, preliminary plats, final plats, stuff like that. I think the more information available for people to clarify things is helpful. And also additional clarification and defining different timelines. I think that's obviously helpful in multiple areas. So I did enjoy seeing that. No further comments.
Okay, great. Karen?
Agreed, I think it was.
And our problem child, Brad. That's okay.
I do like your comments and questions. I guess just starting off table 3.1. Does the BZA not hear appeals on things like the final plat and zoning map amendment, preliminary development plan? Or is that fall in the courts, not the BZA? Or is there not an appeal process for that?
I know that they hear appeals on administrative decisions, because that's not a public body making those decisions, and so the BZA is a public body, public appointed body. And then I think the ordinance can set out, or specify who does appeals for those other things, but Ryan, do you have,
I'm sorry.
You're busy in a couple conferences. Do you have any thoughts about whether the BZA is allowed to rule on appeals from these other things like zoning map amendments, preliminary development plans, things like that? Or are they just limited to administrative decisions?
Well, the BZA has specific statutory authority. I have to review it in more detail, but typically that is determinations like interpretations and applications by the by the, chief building officer of the code, if they want to appeal interpretation of the land development code to the BZA, then that's where they would go with that. And then variances, those are the two things that there's specific statutory authority for the BZA to do that. Was there a question on other things,
Well, I was just saying, I think that it's up to city to kind of set out who hears appeals on those other things, like,
Right.
I don't think
Yes.
it's covered by,
Yeah, BZA is a specific statutory body. I mean, really, I think that they should be hemmed in those specific statutory duties. If you want to have other things be appealable up to the planning commission, the governing body, I think that's, you have the ability to do that. There's actually, they amended the state statutes, in the past 5 years maybe, to allow cities to designate their planning commissions to also act as their board of zoning appeals. And what you actually do, you engage in a fiction where you adjourn the planning commission meeting and reconvene as the board of zoning appeals. Some cities have done that, some cities don't like that. They like the idea of having kind of a neutral body of third parties up there that who didn't really have a hand in crafting the land development code itself, or in maybe making various zoning decisions, to sit on appeals. But there is that statutory authority as well.
yeah, and my understanding of what the BZA can do is that they're limited to making decisions that, in the same way that I would be if I was the zoning administrator. They can't go beyond what is allowed in the code, whereas some of these other things are discretionary and those powers are given to public bodies like you guys.
Usually, most of the time, those other types of action, governing body is really the end. Unless you have some way of filing suit, there's not necessarily an appeal process, especially for subdivisions. Generally, what the state statute talks about is that if you meet the standards of the code, kind of have to approve the subdivision. And that's set out in state statute also, that the planning commission, that's their task, is to approve subdivisions because it implements directly the comprehensive plan and laying out all of that. The governing body has no action on subdivisions. In today's code, subdivisions are set out so that final plats are approved by the planning commission, and then for some reason, the council, or the governing body, also approves them, which is different, and accepts right-of-way easements. And that's the subdivision section is really the part that is the planning commission's power. I mean, you have that authority to approve and deny subdivisions. Really, the governing body in state statute, their authority is to accept or not accept the dedication of right-of-way. So that's a little different as opposed to like rezonings and such, where the planning commission acts as the recommending body, and that's why planning commission is quasi-judicial. Oh, it all comes full circle.
Right.
Second. 301B4, maybe I'm reading this wrong, but the way that I read it, it sounds as though the director can change notice requirements and public hearing requirements, which seemed odd to me.
We've actually changed that.
I think the director can just change the, well, that's a good point, because you can't change the cycle, the time for notice. Did we? I didn't note any changes to that, so that might be something we need to ask about.
That's probably, yeah, that probably needs to be cleaned. We can't change the statutory notice requirements, but, you know, other notice requirements such as, I don't know if he's got like a neighborhood meeting notice requirement in here, or,
The yard sign.
you know, but things like that which are non-statutory in nature.
Maybe you could say non-statutory,
Right.
non-notice cycles or whatever.
But like the, you know, legal notice to surrounding property owners within 200 feet, you don't have discretion to vary from that.
Yeah. Okay. Definitely want to clarify that. Good catch.
I had a question, this shows up a couple times throughout, I think, and where we reference, the closest available meeting, or the next regular meeting, or the next scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
Do we want to identify a number of days instead of just saying the next meeting? Because it seems to me like the next meeting could be, it probably won't ever be, but it could be years down the road.
Well,
Statutory thing that I'm.
when we asked him, does this mean that the meeting has to be scheduled, or the meeting has to actually occur? And it's supposed to be, the meeting actually has to occur within 60 days of determination of a complete application, if you're talking about, D there, staff review. Is that where you were?
Yeah, well, that was the first one that jumped out at me. I know I saw it at a couple different places throughout.
Okay.
But
All right, we'll just make sure that there's a limit involved with that. Is that what you're thinking?
Well, the governing body and even the planning commission statutorily comply, tongue tied. We have to have a meeting so often. It's within our city statutes, so there's no way for it to be pushed off continually beyond that. So there has to be a meeting held because city council, I know it's in there that it meets on the first and the third, and planning commission meets on the final Tuesday of every month. So it's in there already, it's just not in here.
Okay.
The city code would trump that up.
Yep, that makes sense. That's the missing link that I wasn't drawing together. 3.02 F 1B talks about the construction plans for any utilities, infrastructure, and public facilities meet all the technical specifications. Construction plans, and maybe this is a terminology thing since coming from the construction side, but construction plans aren't generally submitted with the plat. Because that's your plans and profiles and how they actually install the stuff.
Right.
And then do we need to define what happens if the application is denied? That must go with point 2. We talk about what happens if it's approved, but we don't ever talk about if it's denied, and maybe we don't need to. Maybe it just falls back to like 3.01 on appeals and all that.
I think if it's denied, it's just denied, and then it falls back to the appeal steps, whatever way to go.
Okay. Where it talks about 3/4 vote or 2/3 vote of the governing body, this happens a couple different places. Is that 3/4 of those present or 3/4 of the whole body?
I think it's the whole body. Is that anything, Michelle?
Yes.
Are you talking about the governing body?
The 2/3.
Yes.
Well,
3.03D is one example.
I
In those
think
cases-
it specifically says 3/4 vote of all the members of the governing body.
Right. So I was just confirming that that means all, not all present.
It's all.
On the protest petition, or we're not?
Protest
Yeah,
petition and then.
It's all members.
In a governing body review
So
session.
if you've got, if you only have, 4 people at the meeting, you have to get all of them.
Okay.
Well, that's like 4 out of 6. That didn't get you there. If you only had 4 people at the meeting, then you couldn't get your 3/4 necessary to meet a protest petition.
Okay. Makes sense. And then this happens twice, and again, maybe I'm either thinking into it too much or not understanding all the steps, but on the governing body review, it seems to me as though the council, if someone on the council wanted to kill something, but they failed to get a 2/3 majority, then they could send it back to the planning commission, the planning commission resubmits, and then the council only needs to have a simple majority to kill it or do whatever they want. That seems to me to just delay the process to killing something.
Well, that's state statute. That's the way state statute is written.
Okay. 3.06B4 has noted that it's, all of those elements can be very subjective, but that's why we're here.
Did you say B4, 306B4?
Yes. 306B4, so the architecture and building design using quality materials, the style that's appropriate for the context considering the proportion, massing, and scale. Quality materials is in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
I think his intent is, I can't remember where it is, somewhere where there's a section where he has planned to cover design standards in more detail, and he's just kind of had an outline in there for now, so that if there's something not covered by the, that's in the design standards now, that's where it would flow into, and so maybe that's the area where some of those things would be clarified better. There still may be some subjectivity there, which, could be handled in the, I think it's maybe some part in here where it has, 3.07 exceptions and administrative adjustments, for example, so I think that's kind of still in progress. And but mark that, if that's not addressed later, that subjectivity, and you're still concerned, then we'll want to ask the consultant.
Okay. That was actually my next question was, what goes in 3.07? Just general knowledge.
Well, I think, that was meant to be a part where if we would allow staff some kind of a little bit of flexibility on certain things, that would be the section where that would be written in, because staff really can only follow the ordinance as written. And if there's a question about interpretation of what the ordinance says, that has to go to the BZA, for example. But this would be a way to build in, very specific exceptions that you could allow if something happened, if this, then that, or you could allow this or that kind of a thing.
Okay, makes sense.
We do have some of that built into our current code, under the site plan section. It allows for administrative, changes to approved site plan within certain criteria. So if you have a change based on A, B, C, D, E, then that's something that we could potentially administratively adjust. And it, it's one of those things that sometimes things change slightly, or you get to working through more of the details of the processes, and as far as developing the sites, and you may need to tweak something, or maybe it's a specific code standard that we can allow a little bit of flexibility for staff to provide, that they're not having to go through a lot of these written processes.
That's all I had.
Great. Good comments. I don't have anything else to add. I think everyone addressed it well.
Okay.
Mr. Kellogg, did you have something from the public?
Yes, I don't know, if something was omitted or it's just a numbering error. 302 planning. We jumped from section C to section E.
302, section C?
Oh. Yeah, the numbering is messed up.
Oh,
Yep.
I see. what you're saying. Yep,
No.
correct, we're missing a D. Good catch.
Thank you, Mr. Beer.
You're welcome, Mr. Kellogg. And with that, we do need to, talk briefly about a special meeting on Wednesday, March 9th. If that would be workable for everybody, the, consultant will be available, is that correct, Kelly?
That's correct.
Um,
He's not available March 1st, which was a BZA meeting that's not occurring, but we'd like him to be here for you. So that was another choice. We can't meet here, we'd have to meet at the senior citizens.
Senior Center
Senior Center.
on the 9th,
Yes.
correct, 7 o'clock.
When do they start the improvements at the senior center?
April.
You sure?
It's closed.
Yeah, I think we may not have access to the senior center.
Huh?
It'll be fine.
Oh, you can pull some strings? You know, guys?
I know that. I'm kind of on the committee.
There you have it.
Kind of on the committee.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're kind of on there.
Okay.
So March 9th.
March
Senior
9th,
Center.
Senior
That's fine.
Center, 7 PM. Great, thank you for the presentation this evening. Good questions and discussion. If we don't have any other items for this evening, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Motion that we adjourn made by Freeman with a second by Barber. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Meeting's adjourned. I know.
They're down by 3.
I was capable.
I don't have a PVR, so I wanna know what's going on.
That's okay, I mean, she always
Oh,
Please keep your binder.
Have a good one.
oh, she said take them, I thought you said leave your money.
Oh, no.
Keep them? Oh.
Keep them.
Yeah, I'm coming back for it. There's a test, make sure you're watching.
Well, and that's why
You guys
we
passed.
put your name on
Good
it.
job, everybody.
They're
Great work.
gonna have to have their
Have a good night.
And I've been telling them that.
So there should just be, all right, you got it, yeah, they got it, money.